I often say to people, don't worry if you can't make it live. Obviously, you can catch up after the event. And hopefully, if you hear things of interest within the event, you might want to go and check them out again and rewatch some of the content. And I certainly do that. And please just keep your cameras off and your mics off unless you are obviously a speaker. I've just made everyone present. But I think as well, from a net zero point of view, having less bandwidth and cameras on is a good thing. And obviously, it'll help us run things smoothly. Please use the chat function to ask questions, connect with people. And as what I do on many events that I join, feel free to promote some of the work that you're doing. I've got no qualms with people sort of sharing and connecting with some of the work that they're doing. So please use that chat function as you see fit. Obviously, if we have any technology issues, just please thank you for your patience. I'm sure we'll be absolutely fine today, but that's just a little bit of basic housekeeping. So thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to this session on carbon offsetting and nature-based solutions. I'm Pete Waddingham. I'm the National Net Zero Lead for what's now called the Health Innovation Network, and I'm really delighted to bring this session to you today. Just as a bit of an overview, I'm going to briefly explain the role of the Health Innovation Network. I'm sure many of you do know who we are and what we do, but I thought it'd be rude not to just do a quick sort of 30-second overview. And then I'm going to give some context of why this event, before handing over to expert speakers who are going to talk in more depth about why nature is good to invest in. We're going to hear from an NHS perspective and also briefly cover NHS procurement and why that's relevant to this conversation as well. Then I brought some companies working in the world of carbon offsetting, and also we're going to hear a story from an NHS supplier in relation to their carbon journey. And we've built in some flexibility in terms of this agenda for some Q&As. I see this session very much on sharing and learning, and me myself, I'm equally keen to learn from others as well. So that's what we're going to do. But before we do all of that, I'm just going to launch a quick poll, if you wouldn't mind. I just want to get a couple of a bit of a straw poll and a couple of questions. So let me just launch this one. If we can whip through these fairly quickly. I think as it come up on screen, hopefully it's coming through now. But what is your level of understanding of nature and the role that it can play in helping us to achieve net zero? So 1 is low, sort of no understanding. 5 is really high, expert in this area. Unfortunately, I can only do a scale of 1 to 5 in Microsoft Teams, so it's a little bit restricted. But please just have a quick vote on that, if you wouldn't mind. The next question that I'm going to launch as well, please, if you wouldn't mind, is just what is your level of understanding of carbon offsets, stroke carbon removal? Probably going to talk about both of those things today. Certainly the phrase carbon offset gets talked about, possibly more so than carbon removal at this moment. But again, what is your level of understanding of carbon offsets and removal? And then I'm just going to ask you one more quick question, which again is about your understanding. It's a slightly different to the previous question, but I'm thinking about more in relation to your business. So what's your level of understanding of how to use carbon offsets in your business strategy in terms of carbon reduction? So again, if you've got no kind of knowledge or understanding in how you can use that as a business, or how you're already doing it, you're well versed in it. So thank you for just giving us those quick questions. I might follow up after this event with similar questions to those that haven't been able to make it live, because I think it's a useful poll. So yeah, just a bit from me very quickly about the role of the Health Innovation Network. As I said at the beginning, we've just rebranded. We used to be called the Academic Health Science Network, but we just rebranded. So when you first were registering for this session, that's the name we would have gone by. Please do check out our website. We've been established since 2013, and there are 15 health innovation networks across England, established by NHS England to try and find and spread innovation amongst the NHS, and hopefully improve health and actually generate an economic growth. We know that good wealth can lead to good health. So we've got our fingers in lots of different pies, and I couldn't do that justice today. So please do check out our website if you haven't heard of us and connect with us around some of the work that you're doing. And as I said, there are 15 up and down the country, all geographically bound, all tied to their local health and care systems, and have got some really good relationships on the ground. Our website as well, obviously we're here to talk about net zero. I lead on net zero, so we've got a bit of a landing page there with some resources, one of which is our newly released net zero innovator guide. And the other thing that we have on our HSN YouTube playlist, lots of videos, and in relevance to this topic, we've got 2 playlists. One was the Green Hospital session that we ran recently. We had about 50 companies come and present, so we've got 12 videos on there. And then we've got another playlist supporting a net zero NHS, which is more sort of generic content. And certainly this session will go on there as well. So yeah, please do check us out as an organisation if you haven't heard of us before. So just a little bit of context about why this event. I'm going to start with a story about Spain National Nature Reserve. So just off the North Sea coast, there's a place called Spain. It's not far from Hull. Just to get your geography right, if you haven't heard of Hull, it's not a million miles away from Leeds. You can sort of see Leeds on the left, Sheffield just there. So that's where it is. It's a big spit of sand that goes out, as I say, into the North Sea. It's probably one of the most sensitive nature reserves in the country. Actually, it's got lots of designations after it. A big spit of sand that's caused by coastal erosion, where that sand moves down the coast and forms that dramatic landscape. And it is a dramatic landscape. Fantastic panoramic views out into the North Sea. Lots of wildlife, lots of migration this time of year with birds. And actually, it's quite a dangerous place at times, especially in 2013 when there was a big tidal surge that smashed through that peninsula and caused it to be England's newest island, which when it was low tide, people could walk across. But when it was high tide, like you can see at the bottom there, it was cut off from the mainland. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I used to work for an organisation that managed that nature reserve, so Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. As you can see from the picture at the bottom, it is a dramatic landscape. Great in terms of some of the work that they're doing. They're just doing a big project around seagrass, which has got brilliant carbon sequestration properties. They're doing work on oysters, which filter water at a magnificent rate and help, reduce pollutions in our seas. And there's me just in the top right, stood on top of the lighthouse, which is probably not a million miles. You can see the lighthouse, very small. That just gives you a sense of scale, but just below my picture there. So yeah, I've always appreciated nature and the role that it plays. And obviously working for an organisation like the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust just brings it to life a little bit more. In terms of nature-based solutions, I'm not going to steal other people's thunder because I'm not the expert in this area, but this was a great report that Colm actually sent to me from Cambridge Economic Metrics. It's as it says there, nature-based climate solutions are processes which have the potential to remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it for a long time. But despite their potential to remove greenhouse gases, nature-based climate solutions are not being created, monitored and protected in the sufficient volumes. So, it's really important that we fly that flag. And as I said, I'm not going to dwell on that too much because I brought experts along to talk about that. I thought it was worth just throwing this in as well. With net zero is talked about a lot, certainly in the NHS. But actually, we need to remember, what does net zero mean? And it refers to that achieving the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce and the amount that's removed from the atmosphere. Obviously, the lower the emissions, the easier this becomes. But people do recognise that, some emissions are going to be needed, will be put out into the atmosphere, and therefore to get them offset, nature is a brilliant place and brilliant way of doing that. And in terms of offsetting, when I was kind of researching this session, probably about 6 to 8 months ago, actually, I stumbled across the UK Independent Review of Net Zero. It was only a fairly recent thing, January of this year, but high integrity offsets bought by businesses can play an important role in the transition to net zero. And from the work that they did, they sensed a real appetite to go further on offsetting outside of the UK emissions trading scheme, which is more the mandatory scheme for big industries. But it did recognise that the voluntary carbon market needs assurance, and people and businesses do need that assurance. And then when I was looking at, there's some big institutions out there that are responsible for setting standards to do with net zero and helping provide that framework. One of them is the Science Based Target Initiative. But on their website, there was this statement here: businesses cannot use any activities outside the value chain to meet their science-based targets, including any type of offsetting activity. But actually on their website as well, there's now this kind of statement that says companies should go further and invest in mitigation outside their value chains now to contribute towards reaching societal net zero. So they're saying that this is really urgent and we need to now start investing in that. And this means that while reducing emissions is obviously the priority, companies do need to offset and invest in beyond value chain mitigation. I think that's the acronym for BVCM, which effectively is offsets and removal to help the global economy align with the 1.5-degree target. So obviously that's the opinion of one institution. There are other institutions that I'm not going to get into today. Other speakers may touch on that. But when I read that, it made me feel that there is still confusion in there. So just in terms of summary, nature is good from my perspective. The UK has some great assets, and you'll hear more about that, from, as I say, from experts on the call. And carbon offsetting has been highlighted as an important area of focus. But I do think there is some confusion out there, and I think that can be a risk for businesses not investing in nature as part of their organisational carbon reduction plan. Unless, of course, we want to shine a spotlight on it, and do shine a spotlight on it, which hopefully is a nice segue into this session today, and the reason why I wanted to put it on. So thank you for the speakers for coming along. As I say, we've got some brilliant people. We're going to talk, as I say, about why nature's good, a bit of an NHS perspective, and then hear from some companies working in this space, and as I said, an NHS supply perspective as well. And then we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, for some Q&As. So without further ado, let me hand over to Dr. Colm Bowe from Nature North to just give us an overview about why nature is beneficial. Thank you, Colm.
Brilliant, thanks, Pete. I'm just going to share screen, so do let me know if that's worked.
It has indeed, yeah. Fire away.
Thanks very much. Okay. So, as Pete just said, he asked me to provide a bit of context on the importance of investing in nature. Just before I do that, a little bit about what Nature North is. So Nature North is an innovative collaboration that's come together to drive green growth and climate resilience through nature recovery. And one of the things we're trying to do that is to drive greater amount of investment into nature recovery across the north of England. So I'm going to touch a bit upon the importance of why we should invest in nature, but then talk about how that links to the work we're doing in Nature North at the end as well. So why should we invest within nature? Well, I mean, the first reasons we should invest in nature is because actually nature is in quite a degraded state. So you may be aware of some reporting that's done every year by the State of Nature Partnership, and essentially what they do is they kind of review the state of nature across the whole of the UK, and then break that down into the constituent countries within the UK as well. So what I've done here is drawn on some of the statistics that have come out of the recent 2023 report just for England, because I'm conscious that the Health Innovation Network work across England. So just picking out some of the figures from there. So wildlife has declined in abundance by 32% across England even since the 1970s. Over half of plant species assessed have seen a decrease in distribution over that same time period. And our distribution of invertebrate species have decreased by 18% on average since the 1970s. So we're seeing a significant decrease within the quality of nature, within species abundance and species distributions, and that's been going on for hundreds of years, but particularly measured by these reports since the 1970s. And we're fairly clear in terms of what the drivers of that biodiversity loss is, in terms of habitat loss, largely driven by agriculture and development, and also the associated pollution, and increasingly climate change and invasive species are having an impact as well. But actually, the good news is the government has actually set some quite ambitious targets through things like the Environment Act, and from that, the Environmental Improvement Plan, to try and restore and enhance that nature. So within that, you've got targets like the 30 by 30, so taking 30% of land and making sure that's in active restoration by 2030, to restore or create more than 5,000 hectares of wildlife-rich habitat outside protected areas, and to halt the decline of species abundance by 2030, and then start to increase species abundance beyond that, I think through to 2050. And that's great, and restoring nature for its own benefits is really important. But the fact is that as humans, we are highly dependent on nature, and therefore restoring nature and enhancing nature and creating more nature also has massive benefits for us as well. So you'd all be broadly familiar with the type of benefits that nature can provide. So, a range of benefits that can help to address our net zero issues in terms of carbon sequestration, but also enhance our resilience and adaptation to climate change in terms of local cooling effects and natural flood management as well. We also know there's a kind of a really clear set of economic benefits that we get from creating nature within the places that we live, work and play. So around, increasing the value of property, around driving visitors into a place and increased footfall. For businesses, they're becoming increasingly aware of the material impacts of nature and how declining nature has a real impact on them in terms of their supply chain resilience. And we also know that restoring nature can generate a whole number of green jobs, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. And then there's a whole kind of range of social and health benefits as well. We know that when we spend time in nature, that's really important for enhancing our community engagement and our social cohesion. We know that there are massive health and well-being benefits from spending time within nature. It helps to give us a better sense of place and kind of ownership and respect for the places that we live in as well. And we know that we could trees and other nature can improve air quality as well. And we're starting to understand those benefits much better. We're starting to quantify those in different ways, whether those be kind of measuring the amount of carbon that's sequestered or the economic value, the wider kind of public and social value that's associated with those, and really understand the benefits that they provide to wider society, to government, and to business. What we do in Nature North is really think about what are the issues that we're facing across the north of England and how nature can really help to address those. So some of the work we've been doing is to set out a business case for nature recovery across the north of England. So we look at various issues that the north is facing, for example, around the net zero issue. So we know that in the north of England, carbon emissions are around 93 million tonnes per year. And then we can start to understand how nature restoration and carbon sequestration or reduction of emissions from that nature restoration can help to start to address that. So we've got two kind of really major nature recovery programs across the north of England in the form of the Great North Bog and the Northern Forest that are really, to largely aimed at reducing carbon emissions or sequestering more carbon out of the environment. And we know that restoring most of our upland peatland through the Great North Bog across the north of England will reduce the emissions from that by 4 million tonnes per year. So if you're comparing that to the kind of 93 million tonnes of emissions in total, it's quite a significant amount of carbon emissions that are associated with that natural environment. And the same for the Northern Forest. So this plan to plant 50 million trees across a huge swathe of the north of England, we know that by 2050 that will have sequestered 7.5 million tonnes of carbon. So again, significant amounts of carbon in terms of us trying to achieve our net zero ambitions. In this case, and from a Nature North perspective within the north of England. We also know that flooding is a massive issue across the north of England as well. So we know that 20,000 properties were flooded, and there was over 1.5 million pounds of damage caused by the floods in Cumbria and Yorkshire in 2015 and 2016. And we know that creating woodland, better soil management upstream of our communities at risk from flooding, by creating those, we know that we can have big impacts around slowing down the flow of water, holding water in places so it doesn't impact on our communities. And also green jobs. So we often hear a lot about green job creation around kind of renewable energy sector and retrofitting, but actually, lots of the recent studies have shown there'll be significant jobs created around nature restoration as well. So two figures from the Cambridge Econometrics report that Pete had mentioned earlier in terms of 25 temporary jobs being created for every 100 hectares of woodland, and 3 temporary jobs being created for every 100 hectares of peatland restoration that happens as well. And then in addition to that kind of initial capital spend, you also get additional jobs created around the maintenance of those habitats going forward as well. And then in terms of the health inequalities and the associated productivity gaps that we face within the north of England as well. So we know that 30% of the North's £4 billion productivity gap is associated with poor health. We know that people spending time in nature and being active in nature can address both mental and physical health issues. And so we know that by creating nature, we're going to help to address those issues. And we can also, what we've also started to do is start to quantify how, again, those nature restoration programs are helping to address these types of issues. So the graph you can see on the right hand side here is showing the amount of households that have ready access to nature, to woodlands across the Mersey Forest geography, which is the community forest in Merseyside. And then you can see how a current scheme that they have around tree planting across the Mersey Forest is helping to address that. So what you can see here, and how that's impacting on those communities that are that have those kind of highest levels of deprivation. So you can see from the graph that the kind of red bars are those households that don't have access to a woodland within 500 meters. The green bars that are those households that do have access, and then the dark green are those households that now have access because of the Northern Forest interventions, the woodland creation that was created as part of the Northern Forest. And you can see that those are actually impacting more significantly on those communities that are falling in those areas of highest deprivation. So we can target nature recovery effectively to help to address some of these issues. So that's great. So we know there's a real need to make that investment into nature, but the question is where does that investment come from? And so there's been a really good study that was done by FTech and the Green Finance Institute recently to kind of to identify how much money is currently going into these nature restoration areas, and then what's the funding gap that we need if we're going to address all those targets that were set out in the Environmental Improvement Plan and through the Environment Act. And what that study found is that there's an annual spending gap of £6 billion per year around nature recovery. So if you look at all the public funding that's currently going into this space, there's a £6 billion gap if we're going to achieve all the things that we've set out to achieve. And to fill that spending gap, then there's a growing initiative, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, around the private sector and private sector funding coming in to meet that gap. So the government's actually set out, quite significant targets around private sector investment within the natural environment. So to have £500 million of private investment per year by 2027, and that rising to £1 billion of private investment by 2030. So what are the drivers of that investment? So as I already mentioned, corporates and other organizations are becoming increasingly aware of the materiality and risk associated with not maintaining the natural environment. They're a better understanding of their dependent on nature and how nature impacts on their supply chains and other aspects of their business. So that, for example, could be an insurance company thinking about the loss of nature leading to greater flooding within places, and lots of other examples as well. On top of that, what we also have is initiatives that are encouraging or requiring business to set out their impacts and dependencies, to quantify and measure those impacts and dependencies on nature. So the UK government has recently signed up to the Global Biodiversity Framework, and Target 15A within that strongly encourages or requires businesses within the UK by 2030 to report on their impacts and dependencies on nature. And then you have other initiatives, global initiatives like the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosure that are being developed to support that as well. So that's a really investor-led type initiative, and it's basically investors encouraging those corporates and businesses that they invest in to report and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature, and basically starting to send out a message that if you don't think about your impacts and think about your dependencies, you're essentially becoming too risky to invest in, and that can then lead to those corporates losing out on investment. So kind of an extra carrot and a stick for those corporates to then start thinking about not only just reporting on their impacts and dependencies on nature, but starting to manage those better and reduce their impacts. We also, which will be covered a lot today, we have the net zero commitment set out at a national and international level, and how then that's impacting on businesses and other organisations going forward. And then we have UK legislation that's now in place as well, that have come from the Environment Act, and that's been driving things like the biodiversity net gain policies as well. And so from all those drivers, what we're starting to see then is a number of markets emerge around, around that are either legislatively driven, like biodiversity net gain or nutrient neutrality markets, but also voluntary markets around carbon, which is probably the more developed, but also around things like natural flood management, and even for biodiversity that sits outside the legislated biodiversity net gain. And then to support that, you're seeing various initiatives like the development of various metrics and verification and codes, like the carbon code for various habitats. You're seeing the government set up and support funds which are bringing together blended finance, so both public and private finance. So there's some public money in there, and then that's being used to leverage greater private finance into that as well, and setting up mechanisms to allow for repayable finance to go into nature, and then you've got public money again that's going in to support that as well. That so things like Nature for Climate, and then schemes like the Environmental Land Management System, which some of the strands within that require a small proportion of private funding as well to encourage that blended finance to be initiated. And what we're doing in Nature North really is we're trying to build that collaboration to make the most of this emerging opportunity around realigning public funds to nature-based solutions, and also that growing opportunity around the private sector, and trying to drive a greater amount of funding and investment into nature recovery across the north of England. So within Nature North, we've got the partnership board, which is the organisations you can see there. So the government agencies, protected landscapes, a whole bunch of the conservation NGOs, and then two funders in the form of Esme Fairbairn and National Lottery Heritage Fund. But then we're trying to work more broadly across the environmental sector as a whole, so working with the community forests and others as well, but also work with those organisations outside the environmental sector that have material interest within nature recovery. So we're working with a range of businesses, we're working with organisations like Transport for the North, Highways Agency, Network Rail, and are keen to work with health-based organisations and the NHS going forward as well. And to really kind of align that investment and to kind of bring scale to those investment opportunities, what we've done is set out a number of investable propositions. So at scale, cross-regional across the north, investable propositions. So we have two of those that already exist and are now part of the Nature North stable that I mentioned before. So the Northern Forest and the Great North Bog. And really what we're trying to do is create a new set of 5 additional investable propositions around other thematic areas of the natural environment. So one around restoring our rivers to manage water quality and water quantity across the north, one around greening our road, rail and energy infrastructure, one around restoring nature around our coastal and estuarine communities, where we know that those places are both environmentally and economically degraded. How can we engage more of the farming community within nature recovery and think about regenerative farming as a way of supporting farmers through that transition of climate change, changing in markets and changing in subsidies? And then how can we address some of those health and access to nature and associated health and productivity gaps around our urban areas by driving greater investment into green infrastructure in our towns and cities as well. But one thing what we really noticed about the Great North Bog and the Northern Forest is they seem to be very effective because they set out these really ambitious vision and targets. So, plant 50 million trees across a huge swathe of England, or restore most of England's upland peatland landscapes, which happen to be found in the north of England. But not only have they kind of set out that ambition, but they've also started to understand how much that's going to cost to deliver. So £500 million approximately for the Northern Forest, £200 million for the Great North Bog. And then they've also started to understand what are the benefits that are then derived from that. So how much carbon's going to be sequestered, how many more people have additional access to nature, how much water we can slow down and therefore prevent our communities at risk being flooded. And the other really effective thing as well is they've worked with they've brought together those place-based actors that were already really effectively delivering peatland restoration and woodland creation as well. So the Northern Forest, with its core partnership, brings together the Woodland Trust and the community forests across that region, but then are working with a whole range of other partners like the Wildlife Trust, like combined authorities as well across that space. And the Great North Bog bringing together 6 existing peatland partnerships that already existed across the north into a super collaboration. So really kind of providing a shop window for those place-based actors, for those smaller projects that are happening across the space, and bringing those together into a wider investable proposition. And that's what we're looking to do with the with the new investable propositions as well, how can we create an exciting scale of ambition around rivers, around greening our infrastructure, and then use that as a kind of really attractive shop window to attract in traditional funding, whether that be grant or public or philanthropic funding, but also those that are increasingly interested in spending ESG money in this space, and then increasingly around buying different ecosystem services. And then if we can generate that revenue, can we think about repayable finance in that space as well? And at the same time, can we bring together the project developers, the place-based actors behind that space to be able to deliver those investable propositions? And then the idea is that Nature North is of the sector, for the sector. We're not trying to kind of take money for ourselves, but it's about driving that money through to the delivery partners, the farmers, the landowners, the local authorities, combined authorities, the NGOs, to be able to deliver all of that on the ground. So I guess in terms of an ask to those of you within the NHS, we'd be really keen to engage with you around what you're doing around nature recovery, and there's an offer here, I guess, to get involved in projects that are delivering nature recovery across the north of England, developed by a set of high integrity nature recovery partners. We're working across the sector to deliver those. So do please come and talk to us about all of that. So that's everything from me. So I will stop sharing and pass over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Colm. That absolutely brilliant. What I'm going to just ask quickly from people is if there's any kind of reflections on that presentation, please just put them in the chat so that we can kind of get a sense of what things maybe prick your ears up. I'm going to give you a quick example. I'll tell you what really stood out for me as well. Well, a couple of things. One, I think it's great the institution that you're part of. That really gives me hope that there's a good strategic organisation, like I say, pulling all of this work together and looking at things like the investment to bring into that. That graph on the deprivation, again, I think massively sticks out. Just a really powerful showing of like our deprived communities do not have access to nature. So that the power of data is really important to me, and I think we've got to keep telling that story, flying the flag for our deprived communities, because those deprived communities are the ones who have the poor health and the ones that the NHS are picking up the tab for. In terms of like the ask as well, thank you for doing that. I think it's a great ask. This session, I really want to appeal to both the NHS's supply chain and the NHS. I think there's two big partners. I mean, the NHS as an anchor institution, I think absolutely plays a massive role in here, but so does the NHS's supply chain. That's a big part of the NHS's footprint. There are thousands of suppliers on there. So I'm hoping that we can bring this topic to life for a few different stakeholders. So thank you again for your time. I won't take any more of Alexis's time slot. So Alexis, I've asked Alexis to come along, give a bit of an NHS perspective. Alexis does some brilliant work on biodiversity, which I'm sure she'll tell you about at a strategic level. And actually, she gets the spade in her hand, don't you, Alexis, as well? So I'll hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks to Colm for a really good starting point as well. So I'll give you a bit of a rundown as to what we're looking at within the NHS. Pete, give me, am I?
You are indeed. Just make it to full. There we go. Perfect.
Right. So how can we increase biodiversity and how can we utilise that on our NHS estate? And what role does biodiversity play within the NHS? Many may think, well, actually, it's nothing. But in fact, it plays a major part of our strategy. So as we will have all know and we'll all have seen, the climate stripes are here. And as you can see, there's also the biodiversity loss stripes and the forest loss stripes. We are one of we are the most nature depleted country in Europe, and we really need to start working through how we can improve that. And the NHS has a role to play as part of that as well. So we need to start reversing these stripes in all three of these areas. So we play a role in how we can change this. So you will have seen the report that was issued in 2020, how to deliver a net zero NHS, and our commitment to align with the Climate Change Act. All of this stuff is now 3-4 years old, and we're kind of pushing this one forwards. But the key part of this is that the climate emergency is a health emergency, and the health emergency is also a nature crisis emergency as well, because all three are intrinsically linked together. So where we can kind of interweave this into what we do within the NHS is a really key part of that. The net zero plan does not cover biodiversity because it is to do with carbon emissions, but essentially there are lots of benefits and lots of things that we can tie in with this. So when we're looking at our scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions of where we can drive down carbon emissions, all of these can play a part with biodiversity and biodiversity net gain and the impacts that we have that goes with that. So our targets within the NHS is we need our scope 1 and 2, everything we can control, to be zero emission by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the national 2050 target. And then everything else within the supply chain is 2045. And this is the bit that biodiversity can play a key part of. So essentially, what are the biodiversity benefits and how do they interlink with the NHS? The procurement strand is the really key part of this. So under PPN 0620 and 0621, it's very, very boring, but essentially the procurement notices, they stipulate that we need a social value impact and a net zero impact. Now, this is a very broad spectrum, and this applies across the whole of the public sector, so not just the NHS. But we're still trying to get our heads around how this could play a role within biodiversity and how we could also play a role with nature recovery and species recovery with this. But there are so many different elements that the NHS can play a role in this, because we are one of the big landowners and we are landowners in the middle of cities. So we can play a role in how we can work with our spaces being beneficial for nature and also spaces being beneficial for mental health and recovery. So there are also another element of playing a major role in staff engagement and also patient engagement. So the social value impact is where potentially we've got a major benefit to biodiversity. We can use this to our advantage for biodiversity net gain and kind of improving stuff. So social value impact, it sits under the PPN 0621, and it's an obligation to have a minimum of a 10% weighting in every single tender over £5 million at this present moment in time, and by April next year for every single tender over £10,000. So essentially we can play into this role, and the social value impact could come in various different formats. It goes through apprenticeship schemes, it goes through volunteering schemes, but it also could be through carbon sequestration, biodiversity net gain, looking at mental health recovery systems which incorporate biodiversity, and planting schemes and various other things. But also a key part of this is nature connection and getting our staff and our community engaged with biodiversity, which is part of a healthy natural health service. So where does biodiversity fit into this agenda? This is the way my brain works, which is a bit of a brain dump of everything. So essentially biodiversity encompasses flowers, it encompasses trees and tree planting, but it also is food growing, it's building for biodiversity, it's increasing biodiversity in our sites and looking at education. And then there's also engagement within the biodiverse sphere and looking at carbon reduction as part of that. But the key part is that health benefit up at the top, and all of that interlinked with everything across the board. So how we get green space, green infrastructure, blue infrastructure engaged is how we can kind of get a connection with our health benefits and health outcomes out through this. So how are we doing this? And I'm going to give you some examples of what's already going on across the NHS, but also this gives you a kind of baseline of where we are and where we need to be going, because these things are happening in various different locations, but essentially could happen at every single NHS site across the entire country, from a small GP surgery up to a large acute trust to a mental health site, to having our own isolated sites that go for a walk, green social prescribing, all these things. So essentially we've started with mapping out our systems and looking at what we've got, and we have a lot of land in the NHS. It might not look like it, but stuck on the right hand side is the hospital. Look at all that grey space. Essentially they've mapped out the green spaces that we've got in these two hospital sites, and Pinfields Hospital in Wakefield, they've got over 10 acres that they are looking to convert into wildflower spaces, tree planting, various other mental health spaces. But also we've got little spaces already captured that we can kind of use within the spheres of other hospitals. So this is Bristol South Meads Hospital, and they're looking at what they've got for therapy gardens and potential for grasslands and meadow spaces, as well as utilising suds and swales to incorporate as part of their landscape designs, and also escape for staff and patients during lunchtimes to go and see something green outside of the grey walls. We also have a lot of dead space that we could utilise. So this is the Morgan Stanley Garden at Great Ormond Street. That during the there was a refurbishment with DIY SOS who put in a tranquil space outside, and it shows how you can go from a really horrible, boring space that children are subjected to in their prolonged stays at hospital, to a nice green tranquil space that they can go and escape to, enclosed in a courtyard garden. We can also look at what we can do to incorporate biodiversity into our building spaces. So putting up bird boxes, bat boxes, looking at swift boxes, house martin boxes, lots of different things. All of these have happened across the NHS estate, but they need to happen more, and we need to get them embedded as part of our BREEAM assessments and various things at the beginning of the processes. We could also put in little kind of temporary spaces as well through bug hotels and various other spaces within our estate to encourage the biodiversity increase. And little tiny spaces of little tiny ponds up to large ponds that are just being started and established. We need to get past somebody's going to drown in there, so there's going to be a mosquito infestation, to understand the mental health benefits of these spaces that we've got and how we can utilise them. We can also use green spaces for air pollution and air quality aspects, and kind of incorporate them into our building designs, because staff and patients are subjected to those grey walls 24/7. So how can we change those? We've got lots of green space, and at the moment we mow it to oblivion. So we need to kind of look at how we creatively can incorporate biodiversity into that and encourage and increase the amount of biodiversity we've got. So there's lots of wildflower meadow projects that are going on across the various different hospitals at the moment, and using those spaces. This is the Pinderfield site that I was talking about, and they left the grass to grow, and you know what, they had so many different species that popped up, and the biodiversity increased dramatically. In fact, to the extent that they found 42 wildflower species on what essentially was a grass field that had been mowed to oblivion. But also we can use the peripheries of our sites to increase biodiversity. So there's lots of different potential, and at the moment we're not really capturing that. All of these wonderful spaces and hedgerows and things have been supplied by the wonderful NHS Forest, who are helping to increase the amount of tree species that we've got on our sites and look at what we can do to increase biodiversity. We've also, because we've stopped mowing, we've discovered amazing wildflowers. So these are all on our different sites across the NHS, and they're species of orchids that we never knew we had because we were mowing them to non-existence. But also we can help with things like species recovery. So this is a tansy plant, which I'm in the process at the moment of installing across our site in York, which is one of the last bastions of the tansy beetle. And by putting this in, we can actually start to increase our species and put in rare species and help to preserve that and become part of that nature recovery process as well. We've got the potential to plant masses of forests, masses of tree species, and use those as part of our mental health recovery systems. So all of these things are going on across the country at the moment. And when you start to look at what can happen in a very short space of time, on the left-hand side, Ardash put in several thousand trees. On the right-hand side is what it looked like 10 years later. So essentially, we can get a well-established forest fairly quickly with grounds maintenance teams looking after them. But also, when we've got smaller spaces, we can squeeze them in. So this is a tiny forest in Oxford that has been put in. We're looking at what we can do for food production as well, and planting orchards across our various sites. So there's lots of different amazing projects that are going on. I planted a small orchard of about 40 trees last week, and we're just in the process of establishing fruit gardens and various other spaces as well. So there's lots of different potential that we have, and we're not capitalizing on it, and we're not working with the general public to kind of establish what we need to do. Forest gardens are a really key way of looking at what we can do in small spaces, and these could be utilised on GP surgeries and could help increase the awareness for staff, for patients, and also those that live in and around the community to engage in nature recovery, but also biodiversity increase as well. The key part of this is how we can kind of look at our staff, our family and our patients as part of that engagement, and how we get them on that journey and to look at what we can do is another part of that procurement process. It's also a mental health recovery system that we also need to embed as part of our natural health service. And I'm going to use that quote many times because I think we need to use biodiversity as a key to unlocking people's health. So there's lots of allotments that are going up in various parts of our estate. And we're also working with patients and using service users to kind of embed that as part of community recovery as well. Mental health services are also utilising these spaces to help facilitate the recovery. And I know the rehabilitation centre that's just been set up down in the Midlands is also using the outdoor spaces as part of that rehabilitation to get people back up on their feet. Because at the same time, we all go out for a walk. We don't go for a walk in grey spaces, we go for a walk in green spaces. So we can utilise that as part of our community benefits. But also we can use those for our staff to recover and have a bit of downtime as well. So we also have lots of unlocked spaces, and this is an amazing space at Glanfield Hospital in Leicester, where they discovered a hidden garden, and literally this is the secret garden that's there, and I would advise anybody to go and have a look at it. They've converted it into the most amazing space for staff, for patients, for visitors to go and utilise, and they use it for therapeutic horticulture and activities, and it's being a massive benefit to their local community and those that live in and around the hospital as well. But also we need to start planning for the future, and green spaces are a key part of that for cooling our buildings, for keeping our environment healthy, but also looking at how we cope with the climate shock. So when I'm designing stations for the future, I'm incorporating green spaces for growing, for looking at wildflowers and looking at how we can cool our buildings. So we do need to understand that the climate and the ecological crisis is also a health crisis. And because the two are linked, we need to work out how we can kind of work with the wider population and work with investment to look at how we can use the NHS sites and connecting with our local communities. So we're starting to create a bit of a biodiversity pledge to look at how we can restore, regenerate, preserve, plant trees, biodiversity, grow life, look at food security, reap the health benefits, and also work towards the 30 by 30 agenda. Because we need to move from the plastic grass at the bottom, where only flies that live on the dog poo can survive, through to having a much greener environment with lots of biodiversity embedded in that. So thank you very much, and I will pass over to the next speaker. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Alexis. What a brilliant presentation again. That really good. I enjoyed that. I was trying not to get distracted with the chat because I was so engrossed in the amazing pictures and the amazing work that you brought to life. I'm hoping others will have been too. Just a quick ask again for people, and I know you're starting to do it as well, but do connect in the chat, do sort of reflect. I saw a comment about the Clinical Leaders Network. This is brilliant. This is what we really need. We need people to fly the flag. We need people to raise the work that Alexis is doing, that Colm's doing, and that our other speakers are doing as well. So please do keep connected and shout about this work, because I think it really does give you a sense of optimism when you can see brilliant visual pictures, what Alexis has just painted. So thank you for that. Really good perspective on the NHS, and thank you for doing the bit about procurement as well at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Lorenzo now. So as I said, we've kind of given a bit of strategic context about why nature is important. We've looked at what the NHS is starting to do with Alexis, and now we're going to go into that world of the carbon offsetting market. And who better to kick off this discussion than Lorenzo from Earthly? So over to you, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, perfect.
Super. So yeah, thank you very much for having me, Pete. I think, to start with, what does Earthly do? Earthly helps businesses to invest in nature-based solutions, and our goal is to try to create, the regenerative brands and companies of tomorrow. I think one of the main things that I see in the conversations that we've had so far is the sort of the term of offsetting. I think sometimes it's become a very negative thing, and I think there's reasons because of that. I think when we first started using the term, it was imagined that companies would simply use carbon credits to balance their emissions without carrying out the reductions that are needed. I think we all know that we drastically need to reduce our carbon emissions, and that is aligned to our Paris Agreement goals, which is to keep temperatures within 1.5 degrees of industrial temperatures. So I think the term offsetting has really put people off and has led to carbon credits and the work that is being done within nature-based solutions to be seen almost as a negative thing. So I think for us, we try to move away from that term, and we try to look at businesses that want to invest in nature-based solutions and integrate them so that they can become part of that net zero journey. I think recently as well, we've seen some issues within the voluntary carbon market where businesses that want to balance their emissions are often having to buy their carbon credits from. Recent Guardian article mentioned that 90% of rainforest carbon offsets were worthless. Now, that was a very clickbaity kind of headline because that analysis had only reviewed a few avoidance or tree protection projects, not all the projects in the voluntary carbon market. However, there was and has been some projects which have not delivered on their goals. And I think that's really important. Why Earthly was created is to try to fund the best projects around the world, because we know that we need nature. To what's been spoken about before, nature can provide a third of the climate mitigation that we need to get to our Paris Agreement goals. So that's a huge amount. That's 1/3 of what we need to get to our Paris goals comes from nature. So that's why nature is so important. And again, what's been spoken about, it delivers 3 trillion worth of GDP annually from the honey that we eat or the cotton that we wear. So it's really critical, but it can have this amazing impact like we've seen on biodiversity, on healthcare benefits. And so how do we correct the market? How do we look at the failures that we've had in the last maybe 15 or 20 years since this market was conceived to try to drive funding to the best projects? And so, what we've seen is an alignment. We now have an industry body, called the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, ICVCM, and they are trying to draw up some rules, the core carbon principles that enables not only the certification bodies, but also the methodologies that these projects have to follow to enable us to ensure that the projects are doing the right thing and are following the right code of practice to deliver on what is either an avoided ton of carbon or a removed ton of carbon. And so those are definitely two sides of the market that I'd like to drill down into, and parts of what we all need to look at when we're trying to achieve our goals. One of the things again that's critical is that we are well behind on what we need in terms of the spend towards nature. Again, it was pointed out in the UK that there's a shortfall, but globally we currently spend around 150 billion, but we need to almost double that by 2025, and again even further by 2030. It's a real there's a real pressure. Nature is very much underfunded, and so how do we draw people to support nature, to understand its value, not only in terms of carbon, but biodiversity, and also the social impact that it can have. And so, really happy to see this conversation going on, and so much great work, not only in urban areas, but across the UK and internationally. And I think, when we looked at Earthly, for us, the reason we really existed was because we wanted to drive that funding to high integrity projects. And so, for us, high integrity meant projects that weren't only carbon tunnel vision, they weren't just looking at the carbon, but they were looking at the positives that nature can have on local communities. That's education, healthcare benefits, so much that nature can provide. But again, not also overlooking biodiversity. So not only keystone species, but insects, different flora and fauna. So this was something that we didn't really see in the carbon markets at the time. And so we really wanted to look at finding the best projects that achieved on all three of those pillars. We also wanted to try to engage people on the power that nature-based solutions can have. Too often businesses are shy or afraid of telling the positive stories that they have. And often, again, with the word offsetting, there's this fear of greenwashing, and now there's this term green hushing, because people are afraid of saying what they are doing because they might be misconstrued, or people might get the wrong understanding of what their overall ambitions are. So I think we really wanted to make that easy for companies to understand how they could integrate and explain what they're doing to have a positive impact, so that they can tell not only their customers, but more often also their internal stakeholders, employees that really wanted to work for a company that had a purpose and that was not only reducing, but was also having a positive impact through nature. And we believe that by having these two pillars, we can really help to achieve our mission, which is to protect 1% of our planet by 2030. So, how did we go about creating the assessment? Really, we wanted to look at, all of these three pillars and the elements that go into creating a great project. So within the people element, we can look at, have the people on the land where the project is being carried out given free and prior consent to do the work. We don't want projects kicking off Indigenous people. We want to work with the Indigenous people. We wanted to share the equity, the revenues that come from these assets and credits to the local communities, so that they could boost their health, their education, and provide resilience in a world where often, especially across the global south, these people are being most impacted by climate change. So that pillar was incredibly important to us. And then the carbon pillar, and this will be a really key element of what the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market is establishing, is key methodologies to understand the baselines that are being selected. When we talk about baselines, let's say in a forest protection project, we're looking at what is the forest that is being matched. Is there deforestation in local areas? And those are chosen as the baseline. So are we choosing the right baseline to calculate that the project that we are protecting, or the forest that we are protecting, is actually being protected for the right reason? The same is true of permanence. Are those trees, or is that regenerative farming practice going to maintain that carbon over 60, 100 years from now? So these are really important elements that we look at the carbon element, but then the biodiversity. So, is there the right ecosystem benefits? Is there the right kind of suitability in terms of the biodiversity? And often within this space, a lot of carbon projects haven't looked at these things. So how can we boost their education to ensure that they're looking at the right baselines? They're looking at increasing biodiversity with their project as well. So all of our projects are assessed through this 106 different data points, and we only work with the highest scoring projects. So out of scoring maybe 300 projects in the market, only about 8% pass our tests, and our clients are able to choose their projects based on their values as well. And I can go into that a little bit more. But here's an example of our project in Sumatra, which alleviates, looking at the SDGs, no poverty, food and well-being, quality education. So it's going to really help the local communities through the funding of the carbon credits by external parties, so that this peatland can be restored and the local community can benefit from this restoration, but also the funding from carbon credits. How do we then how do we take the data when doing that score? So at Earthly, we try to use technology as much as possible to look at verifying the claims are being met. So we use a lot of satellite data. We use carbon rating agencies to support, the avoidance, the additionality and the baselines work that has to be carried out. We also look at really innovative solutions, especially when looking at biodiversity. eDNA. What kind of insect life can we read from the eDNA from the soil, or within bioacoustics? What can we hear within the ecosystem in terms of bugs and birds, that we know that we're getting a biodiversity net gain on that land? And so these are really important things that we believe that technology can help us to prove and to build trust in the projects that we work with. We try to work really closely with our project developers who are doing the work on the ground to help them to also understand what more they can do to improve their projects and deliver on the climate ambitions that we all have. And this is, really important because what we've seen in the past was maybe carbon projects or nature-based projects that were only interested in the carbon. Now we really want to see, and corporate partners really want to see that they can maximize that impact, that they can look at the social benefits of their work, but also the biodiversity benefits. As well as all this information, we also track sentiments analysis. So really looking at understanding what news there is that might not have been covered. Is there issues with the local community that maybe hasn't been raised through the project description documentation? Really, how much more data can we use to validate these claims and ensure that this project is doing what it's doing at the moment? And I think when we speak to businesses about which project is right for them, we're often asked, do you have projects in our location? What kind of ecosystems could we try to match to our supply chain? And these are really important elements. And so thanks to our assessment and this, the review of these 106 different data points, we can really help a business to find the right project for them. At Earthly, we're really proud to have projects in the UK, but also to be working in projects in the global south and around the world. And this is important because I think for us, we can create a bundled approach for projects so that they can have not only an impact maybe in the UK through a biodiversity project or a tree planting or peatland project, but also be helping those communities in the global south that really are having the impact of climate change much worse than we are in the UK. So we can create and adapt a bundle of projects that matches that company's values. We recently worked with a health company and they wanted better health and better education. So we found projects that were achieving those SDGs and those outcomes and created a really strong bundle of projects so that they could be proud of the work that they're doing, really integrated into their story so that it became a really valid story to their stakeholders, but also help to share that really easily with their customers. And so, on the sharing part, a million trees is sometimes really hard thing to understand, and sometimes understanding what's happening in the global south in a region that's so far from our homes is often really difficult to sort of bring home. And so we've really tried to use as many tools as possible, visual tools, data, to try to bring the story to life. So our customers have active dashboards. We have a customer hub where people can learn more about nature-based solutions, but also how businesses can reduce their emissions. And we find that this is really useful to engage people, to tell the story of why this business is integrating nature and also the positive outcomes that they're achieving beyond just carbon. And so I think for us, this sort of engages the staff, its stakeholders, to really believe in the purpose of the company. And we hope that then drives them to further invest into nature-based solutions. This for us is, having those two pillars of trust and engagement are really critical. For us, how do we engage? We offer a certification for businesses. So if you are calculating your emissions, we can balance those emissions through verified carbon credits. We have automated investments, so an API which can connect to any kind of tech stack. So let's say you're trying to reward people buying from you. We could plant a tree for every order, or protect biodiversity or restore biodiversity in key areas in the UK. We also have a marketplace where people can simply go on and purchase. And for much larger companies, and this is true of the NHS generally, it's what can we do to look ahead of at our net zero goals and build projects that can have the potential to sequester millions of tons of carbon. So really owning your own project, securing a price that is achievable, so that you're not impacted by maybe the inflationary pressures that are likely to impact the carbon market as supply and demand pressures have an effect. We've been working with many companies around the world to help them on this mission, and for us it's really important that when we see that nature is so undervalued, that we are getting so little funding, it's about giving people that confidence that how do we make it easy and effective to integrate nature into our businesses, to demonstrate that we are on a journey that matches, you know, our Paris Agreement goals, and excite our customers around what's being done, whether that's biodiversity in the South Down National Park where we're working, or planting trees in Scotland. You know, there's some really exciting things that either people can go and visit, or people can be really proud of having an effect in the global south through amazing projects that are maintaining our standing forests, or looking to replant mangroves in important areas. So for us, you know, it's about having high integrity projects and helping the businesses of tomorrow that want to be regenerative to really be proud of the work that they do. So welcome any questions, and hope that we can work with the partners here to sort of develop and integrate nature into your businesses.
Lovely. Thanks, Lorenzo. We'll take questions at the end, and again, hopefully people will put them in the chat. I'm going to really speak very quickly because my children are coming home any second now from school, and that could be a bit of an interruption. Thank you for the leadership in this area. Thanks for the work that you're doing, and to shine that spotlight on that integrity of this area. Really brilliant presentation again. I remembered, because it's been a while since we spoke, actually. This session has been in planning for a while. I know we had to delay it, but that framework that you put together, I mean, I remember seeing that and thinking, what a fantastic framework, multifaceted. So brilliant. Thank you for that. Let me hand over to my next speaker. It's going to be Tom Gausden. Hopefully Tom's there. We're now just going to slightly change direction a little bit and give a perspective from an NHS supplier. So I'll hand over to you, Tom, and then I definitely won't get interrupted by the kids.
Cracking. Cheers, Pete. So I'm kind of, I guess, building upon some of the conversation and some of the topics that Lorenzo has picked up, and hopefully everybody can see my screen. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly introduce who we are and what we do at Patients Know Best, and then I'll take you through our kind of sustainability journey to date. So first and foremost, PKB, Patients Know Best, we're a patient-held record. And the idea is that we enable people to have access to their own health and care data. So whether that be across primary care, community, acute, mental health, social care, really empowering people to have access to their information, to be able to contribute information to that single record, and for them to then be able to share that with whomever else needs access, to ensure that wherever that person's treated, they're going to get the optimal care and the care that they need and deserve. On top of that, we build in educational materials to support people in having a better understanding of their health and care, as well as the digital tools they need to interact with their health and care professionals. And this is something that we're doing to support just over 3.4 million citizens across the UK in doing. And our key aim is empowering people to take more ownership, have better access to their health and care data, play a more active role in the care that they receive, ultimately leading to care being delivered closer to home and away from hospital services. As I mentioned, we've got a whole wealth of different digital tools that support patients in interacting with their health and care professionals. And through a number of these different tools, we ensure that they're all available to individuals directly within the NHS app. Enough, I guess, in terms of who we are and what we do, and actually more now in terms of the work that we've done as a innovator and a provider to the NHS to ensure that we're doing everything we can to minimise our own carbon footprint. So as Alexis rightly pointed out, the climate crisis is a healthcare crisis, with PKB's fundamental aim of ensuring that people stay fit, healthy and well. We couldn't do that and deliver upon that ambition successfully without us taking account of our own carbon footprint. So we looked at a kind of three-pronged approach to the work that we wanted to do. So the first thing was, we can't understand the size and scale of the problem and the things that we need to do if we don't actually understand our own environmental footprint. So we spent a lot of time and effort looking at identifying where those hotspots are within our footprint and understanding our footprint in its entirety. And that includes things like our staff working from home, got a completely remotely based workforce, but we still need to take into account their usage of resources and energy and their own footprint when it comes to the development and the utilisation and the support of that product. we also wanted to ensure that actually when we're looking at taking accountability for our footprint, that we include the entirety of our products usage within that as well. So actually, rather than leaving that to be the NHS's problem, we wanted to ensure that we continue to be a net zero supplier, and that in terms of our impact on an organisation's Scope 3 emissions, we're having a positive impact in terms of reducing that rather than being a burden to NHS organisations. So the first step was to understand the size of the problem. Second step for us was how we can then reduce that footprint. So even though we have a particularly small footprint, what can we do to ensure that we have an adequate hardware policy that's in place? What can we do to ensure that we're doing absolutely everything we can to minimise that footprint? In terms of devices, can we make sure that each staff member has the device that's appropriate for them? So for example, if we're kitting everyone out with a MacBook Pro when actually they don't need that kind of power, that's got double the carbon footprint of a MacBook Air. So why don't we look at those less carbon intensive devices and make sure that we're kitting everyone out appropriately? And then the next step on our carbon journey was to ensure that whatever we couldn't reduce, again, we've got a fairly small footprint as an organisation, but whatever we couldn't reduce, actually, what are the appropriate channels and ways that we can take responsibility and accountability for the entirety of our residual footprint? So we work with a company called Supercritical. And through those, through Supercritical, we have identified a number of ways where we can permanently remove carbon, and that carbon permanence is something that we were really keen to look at. As Lorenzo's kind of correctly pointed out, the last thing we wanted to do was look at solutions that were kind of greenwashing, that were projects that weren't necessarily monitored or managed, and actually the efficacy was questionable. And that's why we were keen to look at carbon removal as our preferred approach. So what we did, we looked at where are we going to have the biggest impact, things like biochar, things like enhanced weathering, where you've got a carbon permanence of around 1,000 years. Where can we look at investing in future solutions, things like bio oil, where there is that ability for them to have a huge impact in the future, and how can we bridge the gap between what's been delivered now with afforestation? So things like biochar for us seemed like a no-brainer in terms of, and just to explain what biochar is, so it's I can never pronounce it, the burning of offcuts and waste products from farming in the absence of oxygen. So what that does is it creates a charcoal-like substance that can then be used as a fertilizer, again ensuring that carbon goes back into the soil and again has that longevity. And enhanced weathering, again enhancing that natural process for rocks being crushed, spread over surfaces to actually capture carbon directly from the atmosphere. So in terms of that innovator journey, or that supplier to the NHS's journey, for us, we wanted to account for our footprint, reduce it, permanently remove it. And then another key element for us was actually ensuring that we've got that clear, open and transparent approach to publishing everything that we're doing. So rather than this being hidden, or as Lorenzo mentioned, the kind of green hushing, we're keen that we shout about the work that we've done to support our customers in reducing their own footprint, shout about the work that we've done in terms of calculating our own footprint, reducing it, and removing the residual carbon that we can't reduce, both to ensure that we're encouraging other suppliers to do the same thing, but really so that we're not just marking our own homework. We want to publish everything so it's there, it's open for people to look at, and for us to hear more about what else can we be doing in this space, and what are the things that we can do to continue to be the lowest footprint provider to our NHS organisations. So I think I've managed to go through that at a record speed, but I think I've probably kept us more to time, and obviously happy to answer any queries and questions as part of the session later on.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, you have kept us to time, so thanks for doing that. And again, just thank you for the great leadership that you've shown in this area, and hopefully inspiring other people that are supplying the NHS. I've known Tom for a good couple of years now. I've seen that journey develop, and as I said, it's fantastic leadership. And the product that Tom alluded to, Patient Knows Best, as he said at the beginning, you know, digital and the patient held information is fundamental to the NHS. So you're right at the heart of good clinical care. So keep up the good work, and all that great stuff that you do in terms of the platform and the net zero. So thank you for that. Last but not least, then we're just going to return back to the world of nature, of carbon offsetting, and actually just kind of finish off with maybe another angle as well in terms of social value. I'm going to hand over to Melissa from Carma.
Thank you so much, Pete, for very interesting and amazing presentation. So thank you guys. It's been great, and for very good acts to follow. So let me go into this, and hopefully you can see this. Please let me know if you can't. So yes, my name is Melissa. I work for Carma.
Nothing come through yet, Melissa. Sorry, just
oh, nothing come
through. No. Let me just, it's not coming through on my screen.
I work for a tech company and can't operate tech.
Don't worry. It might. Can someone else just shout out if it's?
Let me just see. I think you might be able to see this now. So I was just presenting to myself.
You're lovely. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Great start. Okay, great. Yes, let's start. So my name is Melissa. I also don't work in the tech department. I am the head of sales at Carma. I'm also joined by my colleague Kevin. Kevin is my sales manager, and we're going to talk about Carma. Obviously, give you a high-level overview. We are a certified B Corp, and I'm conscious that I had a conversation with Pete last week about this meeting, and it became apparent from that conversation that if you want to be a level 4 accredited supplier to the NHS, that one of the criteria is to be a certified B Corp. So I just wanted to very briefly touch on that. And then we're also going to talk about, as Pete alluded to, the social impact that we have, and how, you know, how that can have the impact of social value can have on your business. So who is Carma? So we are an award-winning social enterprise company, and we're a force for good. And what we do here at Carma is we make social and environmental impact simple, easy, affordable, accessible. And the way that we do that is we plant trees here in the UK and overseas. In the UK, particularly, we've partnered with a charity called the Green Task Force, and they employ veterans, and we provide them with purpose. And Kevin's going to go into that in more detail. But nature-based therapy is incredible for anyone. It's good for the soul, but particularly for people that are ex-military, so veterans that are looking to, or having difficulties resettling when they come out of the forces. So I mentioned briefly about being a B Corp. This is a video here that I'm not going to share with you right now. It's about 3 minutes long, and I'm conscious of time. And that, coupled with I can talk for England, we'll be here all evening. So I will send this around. I encourage you to watch it. It would be naive of me to think that everybody on the call knows what a B Corp is. I'd like to think we all did, but we perhaps don't. So this video actually explains it beautifully. Goes through the B Corp movement and the reason why B Corp exists, and does a fabulous job of explaining that. So,
throughout history, humankind.
There we go. I told you I wasn't very good with tech. So, what does B Corp mean for business? Well, the B actually stands for benefit for all, and it means that businesses put people and planet over profit. It means that they meet the highest standards of social and environment impact as well. We achieved our B Corp only a couple of months ago, and we actually achieved a score of 127.9. The standard entry requirement for B Corp for a company to achieve their accreditation is actually 80. So we achieved that. We're incredibly proud of that, and this is due to our environmental conservation actions. And the B Corp certification, as I explained, it means that businesses meet the highest standards of social environment and impact. And B Corps all around us. I don't think we quite realise it sometimes until you're in that space. So you have the likes of companies like Innocent and Ben & Jerry's. You've got Triodos as a bank. You've got the Body Shop, etc. And these are all companies that adhere to this certification. It's not an easy certification. It's one that really does pull apart the processes, the policies that you have in place as a business. It's far easier to achieve this status when it's by no means easy at all, but it is certainly easier to achieve that when you are a younger company. It was always on the roadmap for Carma. So the moment that we created Carma, and we've been going for a couple of years now, V Corp was always on the roadmap right from the start. I know companies that have been going for 10 or 15 years, and it's been really difficult for them to achieve it. Not unachievable, but it's certainly a lot easier if you start that early on in your journey. So I thought it's important for us to understand the current situation as to why obviously Carma exists. There was a phrase that went around asking, when is the best time to plant trees? And actually that was 30 years ago. So, around 30% of our forests, covered in 2015. And it's one of, and this has already been alluded to already, but it's one of the least densely forest countries in Europe. So this is, quite a challenge for us, and it is one of the main reasons why Carma exists. And we all know that, the trees, etc., and what they sequester and how important they are to biodiversity. And that is obviously environmental impact is one of the biggest reasons why Carma exists. But when we look at the other side of what we do, which is the social impact, for us, that is just as important as the environmental side. And like I said, my colleague Kevin's going to go into that in a little more depth. But the power of social value, what is social value? Well, it refers to wider financial and non-financial value that is created by businesses through any kind of activity in terms of whether it's well-being of individuals, communities, the environment. And this has already been mentioned on the call today, but even now the government requires that social value is part of tender processes for most of its contracts. So some of the bids there actually makes up about 10% of the marks that the government gives for social value. So it's a huge part of those bids. Even local councils adopting similar approaches. And in fact, actually, a lot of businesses are doing the same. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kevin, who's going to delve a little bit deeper into what that social value that we've just alluded to, having that on your bids, or what that can do for your company, and how we do that. So I'll hand over to Kevin.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. So I'm Kevin. I work for Carma, and our platform is all about social value, and with that comes an environmental impact. And the way that we create social value is through tree planting, and we do it in two ways. We do it here in the UK, and we're also doing it overseas to help communities in the UK and overseas. Just to touch on what we do in the UK, as Melissa mentioned, we work with the Green Task Force. So they're a commercial arm of a charity that work with veterans and service leavers here in the UK, and it's all about providing them with a positive pathway back into employment after service, giving them basic qualifications in horticulture, giving them access to therapy, and then getting them to work within nature, which is a proven therapy for individuals, and it can support their mental health and well-being. We work across the UK on different planting projects. So, the Northwest, the Northeast, the South Wales and Scotland, and we're looking to, increase the amount of areas that we're working. Everybody that works with the Green Task Force is given a vocational qualification in horticulture. And a lot of these individuals, not all ex-military, but majority ex-military, it's all about giving them, that purpose again after service, and really bring social value to these individuals. And obviously a lovely byproduct of all of this work that we're doing in the UK is the environmental impact of trees being planted, biodiversity in the air, in the areas, bring back species to these areas of reforestation and afforestation. So we're working with local authorities to have reforestation in certain areas, especially in the Humber Forest area. We've got a lot of work going on there, but then also working with farmland and farmers, where we're doing afforestation and creating new areas of forest. Could you go to the next slide, please, Melissa? And that's something that we do in the UK, and then we're also partnered with another our partner Veritree. So we're planting overseas at the minute, helping to reforest mangroves in eastern Kenya through Veritree and the local communities there. And this is really important for those local communities. So the social value element. The image here that you can see is a local to the area called Miss Aline, and she is married to a farmer in the area, a fish farmer in the area. And she wasn't quite aware of the impact that the deforestation had in the area has on the local community. And after working with Veritree over the last couple of years, and that education on how important these mangroves are in the area to not only flooding and the individuals and the communities, but the fishing community in the area, which highly relies on these mangroves to bring in income. So all the work that we do in the UK and overseas has this social impact through tree planting, whether it's creating jobs, creating education around the areas, giving people purpose, and that's what we then provide to our customers through our platform, having access to these different projects, giving you the ability to then have social impact as part of your work and offering. I'll hand you back now to Melissa, where she'll cover the end of our presentation.
So Kevin, I thought you were going to, but that's fine. So the benefits to businesses of working with Carma, and I'm conscious there's obviously lots of similar companies in the same space. We've heard from Earthly as well, and it's great to see the differences, and we're all striving for the same thing, but there's different reasons why different people work with different companies. So we've got this incredible data feed that we give our clients access dashboards. So as Kevin just mentioned about the data that we get from Veritree, we have 10 different types of data that they provide to us. So they check on the biodiversity, the condition of the soil, condition of the water. So we get all this rich data. We also get trail cam pictures. We've got some beautiful pictures of some of the animals that have walked past some of the mangroves. We actually have got some from, there's a project that they have in Canada as well. There's a moose that's looking right at the camera. It's incredible. So it's really wonderful to see, that wildlife coming back into the area after the work that we've done. And again, a lot of this has been about the social impact, obviously, as well as the environmental impact. And when you're working with a company like ourselves, or any other company in this space, it's about increasing either customer or client retention or attraction. We've also spoken about bids as well. So when you add someone like Carma to your bids, you've seen an increased win rate. Particularly, we've seen this in the construction environmental service industry, where the social value can take anything from 5% up to 20%, and 20% is a huge part of a bid. And then also we, encourage you to start thinking about your green journey for 2024. What are your goals? What are your KPIs? What are you trying to achieve next year? How is that going to differ from what you're doing this year? And if you are also thinking of applying for B Corp, we can absolutely help you with that as well. We love helping other clients on that journey, and because it's not easy, it's a lot of work, and we would absolutely love to be able to share that, share that journey with other businesses as well. And that's it.
Lovely. What a great way to finish, and well done on your B Corp. Well done on all that work with the veterans, and like you said, thank you for bringing to life the work that you're doing with veterans. Really, really massively important. So there we go. some great presentations. I can see in the chat people have already started connecting, and we've got some questions. What I'm going to just do is launch the remaining 2 questions that I'd like to ask, and then we're sort of finished. And what I'll then do is I am going to stop recording, and then allow people just to ask some Q&As, because not everyone wants to come on camera if we're recording the session. So let me just, well, firstly, let me thank the speakers again. I'll refer to you by organisation, if that's all right. So thank you to Nature North. Thank you to the Yorkshire Ambulance Service. Thank you to Earthly. Thank you to Patients Knows Best. And last but not least, thank you to Carma. Yeah, really, really good. And I just thought, you know, we went on a really nice journey from that strategic beginning right to the end on that social value. So I'd like to ask 2 questions, please, and then I'd say we'll open it up for questions. It's a bit like the friends and family test, this one. I've kept it nice and simple. I just want to know, did you discover anything new or make a connection that will add value to your work? So obviously it's that last bit that I'm really looking for. Will something today that you've heard or a connection that you've made, will it add value to your work? And be honest as well, you know, we need that feedback. Lovely. And then the last one, again, very simple. Unfortunately, it's only a 5-scale poll because that's what Microsoft Teams allows me to do. But I just wanted to know, how useful did you find the webinar today in terms of a star rating? So please, if you wouldn't mind going for that. But I've certainly enjoyed it. I always say this at the beginning of the sessions. I didn't say it this time, but when I put these events together, I genuinely get excited about being part of them, because, you know, I know it brings to life things that I need to improve on in terms of my knowledge. And I was generally blown away by all the presentations. Really, really great content. There was something in there, certainly from me, from all of them, and I'm not just saying that. So that is fantastic. I know I can follow up after this session. So let me just stop sharing my screen. Sorry, stop sharing the recording.